What's up, everyone? Welcome to the DK Garage. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Joe.
Thanks for stopping by and checking out our podcast. We're excited to bring you some next-level content that bridges the gap between NASCAR and daily fantasy sports.
We plan on providing a podcast weekly along with other exclusive content to help you prepare for every race. Last year, we started by providing a race guide, which basically was a digital magazine full of track information, DK data, and other stuff to help you prepare.
Yeah, we did this because we were unsatisfied with the type of content that was being provided. If we just felt it was too much like other sports and didn't take in the unique aspects that is NASCAR.
Yeah, we'll be going into detail about all the content we plan on providing in a later episode, but we wanted to take a look back at the wild 2020 season, so let's get the show on the road.
All right, Joe, let's talk about the 2020 season and how wild and exciting it was. And it literally happened at the very beginning of the season.
Daytona
First race.
500.
Yep.
It was wild, and the racing throughout was crazy. The end is what everybody remembers.
Yeah. So for anyone who didn't watch it or wasn't aware, the race started on Sunday. I can't remember the exact laps that they were at, but I think it was about 20, 30, 40 laps in. It started raining, and so they had to postpone the race. They weren't able to get it in until Monday, and it was late Monday. The race finished under the lights in one of the most dramatic ways I've ever seen, besides possibly the 2001 Daytona.
Yeah, and for people that have followed the sport as long as you and I have, we remember distinctly where we were when we experienced the Daytona race in 2001.
Yeah.
And we lost Dale Earnhardt, one of the kings of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the feelings from that event came back that night. And I can't ever remember a time where I was sitting refreshing Twitter as often as I was, because I wanted to see if Ryan Newman was okay. And that is something that I will never forget, how similar those two nights, or that day in 2001 and that night in 2020 really felt.
It had a very similar feel. I just remember it was such an exciting closeout to the end of the race. It looked like Ryan Newman was going to win. He's being pushed by Ryan Blaney. Blaney tries to pull a move right at the very end of the race, and Newman does what Newman does. He threw a block, and hey, that's his move. Fortunately, the car got a little loose and sent him into the wall, flipped him, and right as he was coming down, Corey LaJoie just was coming in.
But it was where it happened on the race car. It's one of the places that you never want to see anybody hit, and with an impact upside down being hit on the driver's side door.
190 miles an hour at least.
You don't ever want to see any driver. He might not be everyone's favorite driver, Ryan Newman that is, but you don't ever want to see any driver experience something as chaotic as that was. I remember them holding the curtains to block the cameras and just in disbelief, and I didn't know if I'd ever see him walk again.
And the worst part about it is, it was a long race. There was several big accidents. It was late, because they got a late start because of the rain. Monday, and then the broadcast went off after they talked to Denny Hamlin, who he ended up winning, and so you were forced to go on Twitter to try to find anything, any information, because there was no one talking about it on TV anymore. And I was like you, I was refreshing nonstop.
Yeah, and I don't want that to take away from what Denny Hamlin accomplished. He was able to get his second win back-to-back years at Daytona, and that's not something that's easy to do in this sport. We don't ever see, or rarely do we see, back-to-back winners on super speedways like that, especially the Super Bowl of the sport, which Daytona is. It's the mecca of racing, and they start the season out with it. So whenever you're able to accomplish something like that, it shows you the ability of a driver. And I think it lent well to the way that 2020 played out and how he ultimately was able to establish early on his dominance.
Yeah, he I've had issues different times throughout the years with Hamlin. But one thing that I thought was a little unfair is, he's celebrating one of the biggest wins of his career now, back-to-back years, and he had no idea what happened to Newman. So he got a little lit up on Twitter unfairly, I thought. But you're right. He had the second best year. Well, maybe we'll say third best year out of anyone. But 7 wins. He was absolutely dominant, along with the next guy, Kevin Harvick.
Yeah, Kevin Harvick was somebody that definitely was able to capture the chaos that 2020 was, with COVID-19 being a major impact on the season. It definitely lent to his experience as a driver, his ability to have those conversations with his crew chief, that Richard Childress, who has a big knowledge base to pull from with the experience level that they have as teammates.
Yeah.
And it's something that in 2020 was the first time we've seen, basically you show up at the racetrack, take your car off the hauler, and go to the green flag. That's not how this is normally done.
So we should back up a little bit so we can fill everyone in. So the Daytona was second week in February.
Mm-hmm.
They ran 4 races, and then essentially the world shut down. Everyone is very well aware of COVID. So there was no racing for 9 weeks. There was no sports at all for really longer than that. In the meantime, I think it was about 3 to 4 weeks in, somebody or a few guys had a great idea to get all these guys on iRacing and stream it, and Fox picked it up. So we had a little fun simulated NASCAR racing.
Yeah.
I think they ran, what was it, like at least 5 races, I think.
I believe it was 4 or 5 races of Sunday afternoon. You were able to actually turn on something and escape from the chaos at the time and just kind of get immersed into the sport a little bit more, and brought in a lot of different people that I don't think had been able to experience NASCAR, let alone in the esports environment. I think that brought in a lot of new fans.
Yeah. And, obviously some old school NASCAR fans didn't care for it too much, but that really wasn't who it was for. It was for a newer, younger audience. And they actually had some pretty good ratings, considering, it's just guys playing a video game, if you want to boil it down to that. But it really kind of boosted my spirits because, like you said, there was no sports going on. It was just kind of dread and gloom everywhere. And then finally, for a brief moment, we had a break. That went on for about 4 or 5 weeks. And then finally, they got the green light to start racing. And I just got to give a hats off to NASCAR for being able to get the full season in and finish on the day that they were supposed to finish on in Phoenix. There was a couple back-to-back races, some Saturday, Sundays, which was kind of cool because they already had scheduled that for Pocono, which was going to be a cool event for the fans. Unfortunately, they didn't get to experience that, but they did it for a couple other tracks. And then there was a few times where they'd race on Sunday, and then they'd race again on Wednesday. So we got a lot of racing in a very short amount of time, which also kind of helped fill that void.
Absolutely, because me personally, I was able to take advantage of the midweek races working from home. That was something that was different for a lot of folks that they hadn't been able to experience before, and NASCAR was able to capture even a bigger audience, in my opinion, long term, because they made it available in every situation that we were all going through. And nobody experienced, I don't believe, any sort of normalcy in 2020. So NASCAR, I think, was able to bring something to the table and expand their platform a little bit more.
Yeah. They really did a good job this year. And they have their faults, just like any organization does. But I think what they were able to do this year, even getting fans back in to see some races late in the year. I actually was at the Texas race. Unfortunately, I was only there for the Sunday portion. And the Texas race I'm talking about is the one in the playoffs. It was in October, I believe. But that was awesome. Again, that was something that you weren't really able to do last year because of COVID. But the season really was about, until late in the year. The season was about Harvick and it was about Hamlin. Hamlin won the first race of the year. Harvick won the first race after the COVID break.
Yeah, and Harvick was able to, like I said earlier, really take advantage of the crew chief situation and his experience, being able to take that information and make the most of it, and being able to be in a scenario week in and week out where he's either in a position to win or winning the race, because ultimately he had 9 wins during the season, and it didn't necessarily play out long term to where he's the champion, but he's showing you over and over why he's somebody that you should expect to win week in and week out.
Yeah, someone that really shocked, really, I would say the entire sport of NASCAR, whether you're a fan of him or not. Most people aren't. And that's Kyle Busch. He's a veteran. He has a veteran crew chief. They are a 2-time champion. They had won the championship the year before. And they, even before COVID, they didn't look that good. But after COVID, they were honestly garbage. And they were garbage most races.
And I think Kyle Busch was one of those guys that usually is able to take the information that he's able to gain during the practice and the qualifying and relay that information on to his crew chief that makes the car right whenever they are ready to race. But in this 2020 COVID experience and going into 2021, we're going to kind of receive the same experience of the not really having any qualifying. We're not really having much practice in most situations, and that definitely didn't happen in 2020. So you're looking for the experience that you thought Kyle Busch had being the previous year champion in 2019. You thought that would relate to success and wins, and we just didn't see it. We saw a frustrated Kyle Busch late in the year, throughout the year, and that's not something that we're used to seeing. I'm used to seeing a confident Kyle Busch who, KFB, baby, you think he's going to win.
Yeah, you expect him to win. I mean, he burned us a few times, several races in our lineups, because you know he's good at these tracks, and then he would just, even if he wouldn't run bad, he would just not run like Kyle Busch. He'd start 7th, finish 9th or something, just not doing anything. But for the most part, it was starting up towards the front and finishing towards the rear, or wrecking out, or just, like I said, just being garbage. Very surprising. But someone who was able to capitalize on it like Harvick and like Hamlin, and that's Brad. Brad had 4 wins, and he was really dominant on the short tracks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Keselowski definitely found ways to win. He's a veteran. He knows when to put his nose out there and let it stick or bump someone out of the way, or what he needs to do to win. And we saw that play out in 2020. And I was thinking he's, I don't know, somebody that...
He had the second most top 10s behind Harvick.
Yeah, that's impressive. Yeah. And if you've watched the races, you might not even have noticed how often he was up there. But from a DK perspective, it was hit or miss.
Yeah, he was really good for cash type games. Games where you're just hoping that you're going to get a consistent driver. He was that most races. One race that kind of stood out to me with him was the Coca-Cola 600. So they'd only been racing, I think, a couple weeks at that point. Coke 600, big race. Oh, by the way, you're also going to be racing on Wednesday a couple days later. So you have the longest race of the season, and then you're coming right back in a couple days. Absolutely brutal on the body. I heard that some of these drivers lose 10 to 15 pounds every race. Insane. But with the Coke 600, Brad won, but really the most dominant guy was Chase Elliott. And if it wasn't for a late caution and a pit call strategy that cost them the win, most likely, Chase would have won another race. But Brad, right place, right time, veteran call, and it worked out for him. We saw it a lot.
Yeah, and we've talked about veterans a lot so far, but somebody that caught my attention, Tyler Reddick, rookie, coming out in the situation where he's an RCR with Austin Dillon, who doesn't have a ton of NASCAR experience, but he has enough to be very informative to a young driver. He got the win at Texas. That's Austin Dillon, that is. And RCR, I think, has set themselves up to have a young stable of drivers that are able to perform, because we saw Tyler Reddick put that car in positions where he was able to, I don't know, not necessarily get the win, but he showed that he has what it takes to drive it to the front.
He showed that he can drive a not elite equipment and be competitive.
Yeah. And Austin Dillon did the same thing, especially with that win at Texas. I think he's continuing to show improvement as a driver, and somebody I think long term will be a relative week in, week out driver that we have to look at on a DraftKings perspective, because I'm not seeing him as a value play very often. He's risky.
Yeah.
He shoots himself in the foot sometimes, but he's not somebody I'm completely fading either.
Right. Yeah, I think if it wasn't for the incredible win that Cole Custer got at Kentucky, that was an amazing finish. If you haven't seen it, you got to go back and watch it, because it was going to be Harvick and then Truex and then nope, here comes Cole Custer. But if you take that away, Reddick is your rookie of the year. We'll see how their careers shape up if he ends up being the top guy. I kind of think that's probably going to favor Christopher Bell, just given the situation he's in. But Reddick was definitely a force, a surprising force last year.
And you bring up Cole Custer, with the way that NASCAR does the playoffs, with that win at Kentucky, he was able to be one of those 16 drivers that advanced to the playoffs. So I didn't see him as a top 16 driver throughout. The DraftKings data doesn't show him as a top 16 driver throughout. So that's one thing that could be a little bit deceptive if you're not paying attention to some of that data.
Yeah, if we look at it, Cole Custer was the 21st as far as DraftKings points go. He was the 21st best driver overall, and Reddick came in 15th. So there's a big difference. And Christopher Bell's 19th. So awesome to see Cole Custer get a win as a rookie. And like I said, that was a heck of a finish, not taking anything away from him. But throughout the season, he was probably tier 3 or, the third best out of those 3.
Yeah, and Christopher Bell is somebody that later on in the season really set himself apart from some of the other lower tier equipment drivers. And I think he took advantage of some of his experience in other series of NASCAR to take every bit of what he had in that car to get out of it.
Yeah. So before we kind of get into the playoffs and what transpired there was some shocking stories, to say the least, that happened through the playoffs. But was there any drivers that really kind of stuck out to you that we haven't really touched on yet?
Well, William Byron, I think, is one of those drivers that he finally got one of these key wins, and I think he is needed that. He's one of those younger drivers that you look at. He's got a lot of experience in a simulator with the iRacing platform that he got started off with originally, and all these races that he's been able to run at Hendrick. I think this year getting that elusive win late in the year at Daytona was something that he's got to look forward to.
Yeah, I think he was always one of those guys, to me, very similar to Chase Elliott early in his career, where he showed signs that he had talent, or he has talent, and that he can definitely be a contender for wins on a regular basis. But like Chase, he just wasn't able to pull it out. I think I've often thought just the way he is with the simulator. I mean, he dominated the Pro Invitational when he was in there. If he didn't win, I mean, he was up there for it. I mean, he knows he understands how to get around a track. He just needed more experience around veterans. And with that win, I think that he's going to have a lot of confidence. He is getting a different crew chief this year, which I think is also going to be good. And Chad Knaus is going to step into a different role. I think William Byron's setting himself up for a nice, bright future, and he's got one of the most iconic cars in NASCAR history in the 24. So I think yeah, like you said, he really stood out to me as well.
Yeah, somebody else I think that was able to get more out of his car than typical was Bubba Wallace, and we see that he benefited from that with his new ride at 23XI Racing Team, which I think we'll get into a little bit later in a different episode. But in 2020, we saw him on the super speedways where he's usually pretty consistent, get some top finishes there. But I think he's somebody that we saw 2020 really end up being, I don't know, how would you describe Bubba Wallace's 2020?
Bubba, he got more out of his equipment than he probably should have. But Bubba shoots himself in the foot often. We saw it in the Pro Invitationals where he rage quit, lost some sponsorships over that. He definitely had a interesting 2020 season. He's in a great spot. I think this next year for him is going to be pivotal just because he's got the talent. He can do it if he can keep his cool. It seems like he loses his cool, and like we saw it in 2020.
Yeah, no, and that's one of those things that we saw multiple people lose their cool in 2020. Kyle Larson lost a full ride, not just sponsorships.
Yeah.
And so that is something that with the sport that we've seen some dramatic stuff play out. And 2020 lent itself to some dramatics all across the board. So it was chaotic to say the least throughout. But definitely once it got to the playoffs, it was pretty exciting.
Yeah. Well, one of the drivers I did want to mention who's a little bit of a favorite for me is Matty D. He was a guy that both exceeded and kind of underachieved my expectations, if that's possible. He finished second twice at Vegas. He almost won. He was competitive in other races. He was consistent, but from a DraftKings perspective, not one of the best drivers. Not terrible, but not someone you're looking for. But man, I thought he was pretty exciting through the 2020 season as well. And I think he's set himself up for this last year in the Wood Brothers Racing. I think he's going to get a win, but he was just someone that really kind of stood out to me too as, all right, give him some good equipment. He can do some good stuff with it.
No, absolutely. It was fun to see that shape up and see Matty D take advantage of his ride there with the Wood Brothers, and he got an opportunity to get that year extension and see what he can do again.
Yeah. Now, someone who did not really achieve our expectations was another Joe Gibbs guy, and that's Martin Truex. He did get a win at Martinsville, and he had a stretch where he finished, I think, 5 races, the top 3, but no wins. 7 races, but no wins.
Yeah. And that was unfortunate to see because, like you said, he had a stint where it was 7 races in the top 3 where you really thought he was going to get that win. It was, in some places, it was good from a DK perspective, but for the most part, it was a very disappointing.
Now, you've been watching Truex for a while. He's obviously a former champ. He's really good. But do you think that the performance we saw was more of the COVID situation without having, similar to Kyle Busch, where just he needed practice, he needed qualifying? Or for him, do you think it was not having Cole Pern there and having a new crew chief who he's worked with in the past, but it's his first year? I mean,
yeah, I could definitely see that. Cole Pern, he's a badass.
He's a fun follow on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's somebody you can't replace. And if you have that there, maybe he has 3 wins in that stretch.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but to me, I think that played a big part.
Yeah, you think it a little more crew chief and not so much COVID.
I do.
Yeah.
And I think his experience as a driver lent to the ability to put himself into position where he had the top place finishes and he was there for some of the playoff run, but he didn't get the wins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely looking for more out of him in 2021, I think another year with the Screw Chief is going to help, and under the system will help. I think we'll see him probably win a couple races. But now that we're kind of getting towards the playoffs, we had some talented drivers in the playoffs like usual. A couple, like we kind of mentioned, Cole Custer kind of sneaking in there. So let's address the biggest elephant, and that's Kevin Harvick. So he had, I think it was 8 wins in the regular season. No, I think it was 7. Yeah, because he won 2 out of the first 3 races. That first round, he dominated that first round. So he won 2 races in the playoffs, both first round, and did not make the championship 4. What happened?
That's what we'd all like to know. It's one of those things that you can't really explain because he was so dominant throughout. You thought that his experience, like we talked about with Richard Childers, was going to lend to wins throughout the entire season, and we thought we'd see the same domination throughout the playoffs because it started so well.
So when he didn't make, once the race was over, the last cutoff race before the championship, and even after the championship, but let's just say before that, were you on that side that said the point system is terrible, this is an outcry, or are you more like this is the system that we have and this is how it is?
Yeah, I saw it as everybody has this. Everybody knew the rules. Everybody knew what to expect. Sure, I could see the opinion of some of the drivers had, but to me, I thought everybody had the same platform and they shouldn't complain.
Yeah. I mean, he just barely missed out. I mean, you could say he was a little unfortunate with Texas, with the wet weather and getting into the wall. That definitely hurt him because that's a solid track for him. He's won that race several times and the playoff race. So that was very unfortunate for him. But yeah, he, like you said, he had the same opportunity as everyone else. And I'd just like to point out this. Chase Elliott won 3 races in the playoffs. The playoffs are 10 races, and he won 3 of them. And then he won, what is that, 3 races out of the last 5. And he's your champion. And you're telling me that just because Harvick had a couple bad races late in the year that he is more deserving of a championship when he had the same rules that Chase Elliott had?
Yeah, no, Chase Elliott was able to capture lightning in a bottle the last few races of the playoffs and showed why he's a true champion. And I think that's why I don't necessarily think there's any other way to sum it up than if you want to win a championship, you have to win throughout. And Chase might not have won the whole, been as dominant throughout the whole stretch of the season, but he was dominant enough in the key aspect or key areas of the playoffs that mattered the end.
Yeah, he was great. If you looked at the stats, there's a couple races that you might not realize, but he would have probably won one of the Darlington races if Kyle Busch hadn't been Kyle Busch and wrecked him, even though it was just a clear misjudgment on trying to fall in line, but he totally hooked him and he finished last in that race.
And Chase was able to take advantage of the Charlotte road course, which really I think set him in the trajectory of his championship, because this was the first time I believe that they raced at Charlotte road course in the regular season, so that his experience on road courses really has established his
I think you're thinking of Daytona.
Oh, actually. Daytona, yeah, my bad. But he was able to take the road course experience that he has and apply it to assert his dominance in this realm of the final portion of the season and really capture that.
Yeah, I think at this point, if you look at the last couple of years, there's some really good road course drivers, but Chase Elliott is now at the top, which is going to be a huge advantage for him next year, where there are currently 7 races scheduled for road courses. So he's definitely set up well for next year. But anyone, in my opinion, if you're just saying Kevin Harvick should have won based on the old point system, that's like, look, Chase Elliott won 3 out of the last 5 races. He dominated Martinsville. And his team really came in and handy that race. And then Phoenix, they fail inspection. and he comes literally from the rear of the field and dominates the race. There was I actually remember we were going over our lineups and we got the news. I think you actually texted me, "Hey, Chase to the rear," and you're like, "I'm going to start adjusting my lineups," and I'm like, "I'm not. I don't care. If you're not cheating, you're not trying." And I knew as soon as that happened, I'm like, it's not my favorite position from DraftKings because you want your guys up front leading. I'm like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and he was able to perform, and he locked it in.
Yeah, he was absolutely great. Led the most laps. Just a phenomenal performance in the last race. So he's definitely someone who's going to be, I believe, a factor for many years to come. And not only that, he is the fan favorite.
Yeah, he's the face of NASCAR now. You've had a big shift. Jimmy Johnson's no longer part of Team Hendrick. He's no longer the face of NASCAR. The 7-time former champion has retired, and so I think Chase fits the role of what Jimmy was. Chase potentially could be, and so he's the face of NASCAR in my opinion.
He's the new face. I mean, obviously, there's other guys that are still fan favorites, but he's definitely the most popular. He is the new Dale Earnhardt Jr. He's kind of the new Gordon. I mean, he's the new Jimmy. He's gonna have to kind of assume that role. But it's also going to be kind of interesting to see how that team does next year because there were some big changes at Hendrick. Kyle Larson's now going to be in Hendrick. Obviously, Bowman's moving to the 48. We mentioned Byron getting his win, so I think he's going to be good. So that Hendrick has not been the top team in several years, but I think with some of the moves this year and setting up for 2021, they're one of the best teams going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that because like we were talking about, Chase has established himself as that anchor, and you've got those two younger drivers in Bowman and Byron, and then you add Larson to that mix. It's pretty incredible.
It's pretty potent.
Yeah, it's pretty potent.
So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But overall, I mean, how did you feel about the season? I mean, what kind of grade would you give the season overall?
Well, it was wild. It was crazy. It was chaotic. I think that went with everything that was going on. I think NASCAR did exceptionally well. Yeah. They don't get, I don't think, enough credit with the chaos that was there because you're traveling across the country. You're not in a bubble like the NBA had, and you're exposed to a lot of different things. And Jimmy had one race he missed, and Austin Dillon had one race he missed.
That's true.
There's two drivers throughout.
That race, let's be honest, that race, and then also there was a race where they DQ'd Jimmy Johnson, Martinsville maybe.
Oh yeah.
So he essentially had two races that he missed in the points, which cost him from making the playoffs.
Yeah.
Which really was a bummer, just given him 7-time champion, you know.
And it's a disappointment to see Jimmy go out that way with all the chaos and the uncertainty. It'd been great to just hear Jimmy say, "I want to go one more year."
Yeah,
because
get the
salute, fanfare,
yeah.
the everything that you should have as you go out. We see it across all the other sports that everybody gets showered with it, and we expected the same thing for Jimmy, except for the COVID impact just
it really
put a damper on it.
That probably affected him really badly, just from his career standpoint. But the exciting thing is he's not going away. He's going to be racing IndyCar, the road courses and street courses. So we'll get to at least see that. I'm excited because I don't watch a ton of Indy, so I'll watch a little bit more because of Jimmy. But you kind of mentioned chaos, and that just made me think of Clint Boyer going to the booth with Jeff Gordon. We're already seeing some pretty funny promos from Fox, so I think that's really something we get to look forward to for this next year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting and fun. Fox's booth's been dry a little bit since DW retired. I think we can both agree on that.
Oh yeah.
So I think Clint Boyer adds that element that's been needed. He's got a lot of background in having fun.
Oh yeah.
So if he needs to have the crew,
He's relatable.
yeah, he's relatable. He's an everyday guy that happens to be a NASCAR driver, and he's going to bring the driver aspect that is not necessarily as dry as Jeff Gordon is sometimes, and make it fun.
Right. Yeah, and I think Gordon trying to fit in with DW just wasn't the best fit. They're different eras of racing, a different perspective, but Gordon didn't retire that many years ago. And obviously Boyer's retiring this year, so they have fresh perspective on what these cars are doing, who these drivers are. DW never raced against most of those guys, so I think that's one of the reasons why Jeff Gordon appears to have struggled some. But I think the last couple of years, and then we saw it in the Pro Invitational when they were working together, they worked well, and I think Gordon's finally going to really be the Gordon that we've been wanting for a while.
Yeah, I think it will bring out the best of them because they definitely know how to play off each other.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be good. And, of course, Mike Joy's always top-notch. So we're definitely excited for that. But anything else kind of really stand out to you about the 2021 season that you wanted to kind of touch on before we wrap this up and start talking about the next year?
Well, I think I would like to talk about some favorite moments maybe that we had, because one that stuck out to me was, you alluded to it earlier, was Martinsville and the little issue on pit road that Chase Elliott experienced, and that was his jackman jumped over the wall a little early. And by early, we're talking like 6 seconds early, it seemed like. And it was an affinity, but he was able to make a wise last-second decision, go back and touch the wall.
Yeah,
so
he knew the whole team was just very aware of what the rule book states.
Yeah, and so from a team perspective that Hendrick knows what they're doing. They hire guys that are going to make them champions ultimately, and you saw that play out throughout that race. And in that moment, the team performed the entirety of the race, not just on the racetrack, but in the pit stalls.
Everyone did their job exceptionally well. No one, you could say in the playoffs, Harvick maybe let his team down a little bit, or maybe it's the team let Harvick down. But Chase and his team and his crew chief, they were dialed in at the end of the year when it mattered the most.
Yeah, and that was my favorite moment because it was so impactful. It's something that you'll remember, and it wasn't necessarily on the racetrack that it happened. It was in the pits, and it takes a team. That's what is so great about NASCAR, and that applies across the board, which we understand through our experience of watching the sport, and that is definitely one of those things I'll remember for a while.
Yeah. I'd say, man, there's so many great moments throughout the year. Like I said, and we talked about the Pro Invitational, that was just a great moment, just given the time period. Different races, but I would say for me, seeing that image, that video of Ryan Newman walking out of the hospital with those little girls, it's like, even as someone who's not a particular like Ryan Newman fan, I've had more issues with him than I've cheered him on, just because he's so hard to pass. But that was probably the best moment of the year, just knowing it's like, okay, as dangerous and as wild as this sport is, which is why we love it, there's enough guys working on the safety of these cars that these guys can put on the best show that, in my opinion, that there is when it comes to sport. I mean, 200 miles an hour, inches away from one another, and flipping, wrecking, yet you can still walk out of the hospital. In most cases, you don't even end up in the hospital. So for me, that's probably my favorite or most standout moment of the year.
Yeah, and you summed it up, why we love the sport. It's you don't get this thrill from any other sport, and that's why it's something that you and I have followed for decades now and enjoy. So we definitely appreciate you being part of this. We are going to provide you with a couple additional episodes leading up to Daytona. We'll preview 2021, try to give you some predictions and projections potentially.
Yep. And then as we get into the season, we're going to really be focusing race by race, just getting you caught up so you know what's going on, if there's any changes in between the weeks or penalties or stuff like that. We'll get you caught up on the racing aspect, and then we're also going to give you information about DraftKings. So if you want to build lineups and and really add to the excitement of the race with either your favorite drivers or just the chance to win some extra money. We're going to be providing a lot of info each and every race about that. So be sure to like this video and subscribe if you are interested in seeing more of us and more about NASCAR.
Yeah, and then make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the DK Garage. So with all that being said, we appreciate it.
Until next time.